Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeanne Tarrant, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this session in the Wetlands Indaba. I'm going to be speaking to you very briefly about the role of wetlands as landscapes for amphibians in South Africa. So I am Jeanne Tarrant. I run the Threatened Amphibian Program for the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and we work essentially on flagship species that are threatened around the country and work towards protecting their habitat, which in many cases is wetland associated. So why frogs? Why frogs as a conservation target? Amphibians as a group have been around for a very long time. They literally crawled out onto land around about 350 million years ago and have since then managed to occupy every niche on the planet. They found on all continents except for Antarctica, where it's too cold for them, and some of the isolated islands that they haven't managed to get to. And the fact behind that is also very critical to their life histories and ties into the use of wetlands as well. So today we're seeing that as far as vertebrates go, amphibians as an entire class are the most threatened vertebrate on the planet. And the latest IUCN assessment shows that around 41% are considered threatened. So that's in the critically endangered, vulnerable, or near threatened groups. So this is really significant proportion of a very large group of animals. There's around 8,000 different species globally that are currently on the risk of extinction. In terms of population declines, nearly half of all those species are experiencing some form of decline. And we've seen the extinction of around about 168 species in the last 4 decades. And really, this is unacceptable given what a diverse group of animals these are, and should really be a massive warning of what's happening to the health of the planet, and in particular to our freshwater systems. We all know that wetlands themselves are also massively threatened. This is a stat around 50%, but I've heard others where as much as 80% of our wetlands globally have been lost. And so we can see that these are completely linked, the loss of wetland habitat and the declines in amphibians around the world. So here in South Africa, the situation is similar, reflects what's happening globally. We currently have about 135 described species of frog, which is not bad going for a largely arid country. 68% of these are endemic to the country. They only occur within South African borders, and that's significant. And 39 of the total number of species are threatened or are not yet assessed. So again, a significant proportion of the species threatened according to the IUCN. The graphic on the right is from the National Biodiversity Assessment, which was completed in 2018. Again, just showing that the proportion of threatened species comprises many endemic species. So why do frogs need wetlands? So all amphibian species require fresh water in order to carry out their life histories. Primarily, frogs and tadpoles have a thin, porous skin. It's semi-permeable. They actually use their skin for breathing. They absorb oxygen through their skin, release carbon dioxide, more so than they do through their lungs. So being moist throughout their life is critical. Tadpoles, of course, mostly live in water, so it provides a crucial habitat for the development of most amphibian species. And to this end, frogs need water, fresh water, to be able to reproduce. So wetlands provide these critical habitats for these life history processes. And most frogs in wetlands are active during our rainy season. So, frogs are very tied to seasonal patterns as well. And many of our wetlands are temporary. And so we tie a lot of the appearance of these temporary wetlands to the activity. And of course, the habitat of wetlands and vegetation provides shelter and foraging areas for frogs. So basically, all frogs need moisture and fresh water moisture. We don't find any amphibians in the ocean environment. It's too saline for them and would essentially dry them out. So they need this freshwater system to be able to survive and reproduce. Most amphibians have this typical life cycle where they use the land and the water in order to carry out their life cycle. Of course, there's many variations on this, but typically an adult frog or adult frogs will come together in or near to the water and lay their eggs close to water, and the development of tadpoles takes place over time in the water. This could be anything from a few weeks. So again, talking about those temporary systems that dry out quickly, those species, whereas some take up to 2 years. So again, we're looking at a wide range of freshwater habitats in which this can take place. So if we look globally where we find amphibians, we can then expect to find them in areas that are moist and warm typically. So you can see South America, the Amazon basin, really is the hotspot for amphibians globally. But we're not doing, as I said, too badly in South Africa with 135 species, primarily found on the east coast of KZN. But if we move into the Western Cape, where we're getting those very endemic species tied to the fynbos habitats, that's where we're finding a frog. So again, correlated quite closely to where we're finding wetlands. Amphibians in most temperate and tropical ecosystems make up a huge proportion of the biomass. And this is because they are there to provide food to a large range of other animals. So anything from other amphibians themselves, through the birds, through the reptiles. Frogs play a critical role in provision of food to predators. They themselves are predators of invertebrates. And so a lot of this unfolds in wetland habitats. So again, these habitats are providing home to both the predators and the prey that amphibians require. Of course, as I mentioned, some of our frogs are not typical and are actually able to survive in deserts, but again, they need fresh water in order to be able to reproduce and live out their life cycles. But if we're talking about wetlands, again, there's a vast variety of these wetland types where we find amphibian species occurring. So anything from reedbed wetlands, typical of KZN, Zululand. Grasslands are essential habitats for many species of frogs. And there we're looking at seepage type wetland habitats, hygrophilous grasslands, that kind of thing. Open water body wetlands, a large number of species are using these, more of your common species. But in all cases, all actually very intrinsically tied to the vegetation around these wetlands. It's quite rare that we find frogs in open water systems without surrounding vegetation. So dams typically are not incredible habitat for frogs. We want to keep our wetlands intact and functioning as the sponges that they are in nature. We can also create wetland habitat in our gardens or in offsets for developments. These are proving to be quite important habitats as well. So I've mentioned that these wetland systems provide crucial areas for life processes for amphibians. So from breeding through to egg deposition and the development of tadpoles, through to provision of area for foraging and for shelter. All right, so just to talk a bit about what we do in the Threatened Amphibian Program at the Endangered Wildlife Trust. As I mentioned, we've been running for 8 years now, and we now directly employ more people than any other organization in the country focused on amphibian conservation. There are now 8 of us in the team all around the country, and I'll speak a little bit more about each of those projects. So we really try to directly address threats that are facing amphibians in South Africa. And a key part of this is driving social or behavioral change by people that is going to benefit amphibians and their habitats. So our team even have meetings in wetlands sometime, and this is two of our biodiversity protection officers down in Adams Mission in KwaZulu-Natal, joining in for a team meeting at one of the wetland sites that we work at. So we work across the country, really three main focal areas, the KwaZulu-Natal coast, where we're looking at the endangered Pickersgill's reed frog, which is entirely wetland associated. I'll talk a bit more about that just now. The endangered kloof frog, which also occurs down into the Eastern Cape. That's a stream forest species. In the Eastern Cape, we're focused on the critically endangered Amatola toad, which is a grassland species. And then quite a recent development of a new focus in the Western Cape, looking at a number of threatened and endemic species there. So as I mentioned here on the KZN coast, we're looking at Pickersgill's reed frog. This species lives in critically endangered Indian Ocean coastal belt wetland, hardly any of which is formally protected. The species only occurs in 2 formally protected areas. The rest of the 38 known sites are currently at the whim of development, whether that's industrial, agricultural, or urban, and we're working to try and manage and protect these habitats. So one of our focal sites is in Adams Mission, inland of Amanzimtoti on the south coast. This area comprises of 3 catchments, which make up 500 hectares of this Indian Ocean coastal belt wetland. It is the reference site for this wetland habitat. It's the largest remaining area within the entire province remaining, and occurs within eThekwini municipality, but is also under traditional authority governance, and is working out these structures of governance to get the local community to take ownership and to protect this habitat. It's extremely difficult. As you can imagine, Durban is a growing area, and development is actually happening here at an unprecedented rate. So the threats to this area are significant. There is rapid urban development happening within the wetland footprint. There is illegal dumping, including of nappies, which is a massive problem across all of our sites. But we have worked in the area to train 4 local site guards. We conduct annual wetland health assessments, and our site guards conduct ongoing ecological goods and services to give us an idea of the wetland and water quality in the area, and to gauge the impact of our conservation interventions. We also monitor our flagship species, of course. So here, Pickersgill's reed frog. We use acoustic monitoring at our sites to monitor the presence and abundance of these species. And here we are trying to formally declare Adams Mission as a protected area, and also in parallel to that, build nature-based tourism through the training of nature site guards. We are looking at developing the KZN frog route, which is entirely based on these wetland systems along the coast where Pickersgill reed frog occurs. In the Eastern Cape, we're looking at the critically endangered Amatola toad. That occurs in these upland, montane, grassland wetlands. And again, working here to protect habitat using the biodiversity stewardship approach through landowner agreements with private landowners. We're looking at a total of around 30,000 hectares in the Amatola area for habitat protection. Then we recently moved into the Western Cape, and we're here looking at 3 threatened and endemic species. On your left, the rough moss frog, critically endangered, only occurs in 1 site. And then the recently described moonlight mountain toadlet, Pensibrufo coelonophus, tied or associated with only 1 mountain range, and before we started the project, known only from 3 sites. And they occur in these incredible fynbos heathland seepages, again, type of wetland habitat up in the high altitudes. And again, looking at the feasibility of biodiversity stewardship to increase the formal protected area for these species and their habitats. Down in the Cape Peninsula, we're looking at 3 species there, 2 of which are associated with wetland habitats, so the endangered western leopard toad in the middle there, and the micro frog down on the bottom, very much tied to wetlands in Fynbos. A core part of our work throughout our projects is environmental education and highlighting the importance of not only frogs, but their habitats, the wetlands. And here's just a little example of the before and after educational assessments we do. And so we take, or before we engage with students, we ask them to draw a wetland. And you can see on the left there, we've got scary fish in there and not a lot of nature associated with the wetlands. After our engagement, which would include a visit to a wetland, as well as classes and experiential learning with frogs in the classroom, we start to see a lot more diversity happening in these pictorial before and after assessments. And all this kind of work is critical to improving an appreciation for frogs, which are also very feared, and their habitats, which can also be seen in a negative light and not providing crucial services to the local communities. So that's a very quick wrap of what we're doing through the Threatened Amphibian Program for our threatened frogs around the country and the wetland habitats, and working towards improving the protection of these. Thank you.